From a distance, Adrian and Victoria Hart looked untouchable. Their Georgian-style home stood at the edge of town like a monument to success, white columns rising against the pale sky, gardens trimmed with precision. At neighborhood gatherings, people whispered admiration. Adrian, the brilliant businessman who always had a story to tell, and Victoria, the perfect hostess with her gracious smile and elegant dresses. Together, they were the couple everyone envied. But behind the shimmer of champagne glasses and polite laughter, darker notes hummed beneath the surface. Victoria's smile was practiced, the kind that stiffened at the corners when Adrian's hand tightened on her arm, a fraction too firmly. Guests rarely noticed, and if they did, they excused it as passion, as intimacy. Adrian was magnetic after all, the sort of man who commanded attention without ever raising his voice. One autumn evening, their living room brimmed with neighbors. Firelight flickered across Adrian's sharp profile as he recounted a tale about closing a high-stakes deal. The room erupted with laughter, all eyes drawn to him. Beside him, Victoria nodded dutifully, her glass of wine trembling slightly in her hand. "Careful, darling," Adrian murmured under his breath, leaning close enough that only she could hear. His smile didn't falter for the crowd, but his tone cut sharp. "You're spilling." Victoria lowered her gaze, steadying her hand, swallowing words she didn't dare speak. Later, when the guests had gone, silence settled like dust. Victoria gathered glasses from the table, the faint scent of cigar smoke still hanging in the air. Adrian lingered in the doorway, watching her. "You looked radiant tonight," he said smoothly. "Thank you." Her voice was soft, almost automatic. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering a second too long. "But you mustn't let nerves show. People notice these things," her throat tightened. "I wasn't nervous." Adrian's eyes glinted with amusement, though there was steel beneath it. "Of course not." "You're perfect." The words sounded like praise, yet carried the weight of command. Victoria forced a smile, the same one she wore for the world. Polished, careful, unyielding. Inside, her chest felt heavy, as though she were standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous. The next morning, sunlight streamed across the pristine kitchen. Victoria arranged flowers on the counter, while Adrian scrolled through emails at the breakfast table, the crisp rustle of his newspaper a soundtrack to their silence. From the outside, it was an idyllic scene. Husband and wife beginning another successful day. But the cracks were there, invisible to the neighbors walking their dogs outside. In the stiffness of Victoria's posture, the way Adrian's gaze lingered just long enough to remind her of unspoken rules. To the world, they were a portrait of stability. To each other, they were actors in a play that demanded perfection. And like all performances, it could not last forever. It began on an ordinary Tuesday. Adrian had left early for a business meeting, his leather briefcase snapping shut with military precision. The house fell quiet, sunlight spilling across polished floors and the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. Victoria busied herself with routine, watering the orchids, folding laundry, pretending that her life was as seamless as the polished marble beneath her feet. But curiosity has a way of blooming in silence. While tidying Adrian's study, a room she rarely entered, Victoria noticed a drawer slightly ajar. Normally, Adrian locked everything. He guarded his workspace as though it held national secrets. That day, however, the drawer had been left carelessly open as if in haste. Inside lay a leather-bound notebook, its cover plain, its pages filled with numbers and symbols. The handwriting was Adrian's, sharp, deliberate, almost too neat. At first glance, it resembled ordinary accounting, but the deeper she looked, the stranger it seemed. Sums that didn't add up, initials instead of names, coded marks alongside amounts far too large for their household needs. Her pulse quickened. When Adrian returned that evening, she tried to sound casual. "I came across a book in your desk today." The one with unusual numbers. Adrian's expression flickered for only a fraction of a second. But Victoria caught it, the tightening around his eyes, the subtle pause before his smile returned. "Oh, that old thing?" he said, his voice warm, amused. "Darling, you've been reading too many mystery novels. It's nothing but shorthand for business expenses. Tedious, really." "I don't know," she whispered, hesitant. "It looked strange." Adrian chuckled, stepping closer, brushing a hand against her cheek with mock affection. You always worry too much. You see shadows where there are none. Leave the numbers to me. Your world is the flowers and the parties, isn't it? His tone was playful, yet it carried the sting of dismissal. Victoria forced a smile, nodding as though reassured. But inside, doubt gnawed at her. She replayed the way his hand lingered on her skin. Not tender, but controlling. The warmth of his laugh felt less like comfort, and more like strategy, designed to make her question her own instincts. Later that night, while Adrian slept soundly beside her, Victoria lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The ledger's pages danced in her mind, the symbols etched behind her eyelids. Were they really harmless notes? Or something darker, something carefully concealed beneath his flawless image? The house was silent save for the steady tick of the clock. In that silence, she realized something unsettling. She no longer trusted her husband's words as easily as she once did. The ledger remained locked away the next day, its drawer sealed tight. Adrian made certain of it, and though Victoria said nothing more, the first fracture had appeared in their carefully painted portrait. It was small, almost invisible, but fractures, once formed, never truly heal. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain as Victoria stepped out of the gallery fundraiser. Her heels clicked against the stone steps, her smile frozen in place even after the last handshake. Behind her, Adrian basked in praise, laughing easily, weaving through the crowd with practiced charm. To everyone watching, they were flawless, the enviable couple. But then a voice called her name. Victoria? She turned, startled, and saw him, Thomas Hale. His presence was like a ghost from another life, stirring memories she thought she had buried. In college, he had been warm, attentive, the kind of man who looked at her as if she were more than a polished ornament. Time had sharpened him. His jaw was firmer, his eyes more serious, his suit dark and discreet. And yet his gaze still carried that same disarming honesty. Thomas, she breathed, surprised. It's been years. He smiled faintly, though the weight in his expression betrayed a deeper purpose. I didn't expect to see you here. Can we talk privately? Victoria hesitated, glancing back toward Adrian, who was still engaged in conversation. For a moment, she felt like a teenager again, sneaking glances when no one was watching. She nodded. They slipped into the quieter corner of the lobby where the glow of chandeliers faded into shadow. I need to be careful with what I say, Thomas began, lowering his voice. But the name Adrian Blackwell has crossed my desk more than once. Her heart stumbled in her chest. Your desk? What do you mean? I work with the Bureau now. Financial Crimes Division. His tone was measured, careful. Let's just say your husband's business ventures aren't as clean as they appear. There are movements of money, offshore, coded, disguised. It's the kind of activity that attracts attention. Victoria swallowed, fighting to keep her expression composed. That's impossible. Adrian's work is legitimate. Everyone knows that. Thomas's eyes softened with pity, but he didn't back down. I know you want to believe that, but you've always been too trusting of him. I just thought you should know, because when the walls come down, they come down hard. The words lodged deep inside her, cutting through the carefully constructed reality she lived in. For a fleeting second, the image of the ledger she had found weeks ago flashed before her eyes. Numbers, symbols, secrets, Victoria. Adrian's voice carried across the room, warm and commanding. He was approaching now, his smile fixed, though his eyes narrowed ever so slightly at the sight of Thomas. She straightened quickly, forcing composure. It was nice catching up, Thomas. Take care. Thomas gave her a searching look, part warning, part longing, then disappeared into the crowd. Adrian slipped an arm around her waist, his grip firm. An old friend? Yes, she said, her voice steady but her pulse racing. Just an old acquaintance from school. He studied her for a moment, his smile lingering, though suspicion flickered beneath it. You always were popular. Victoria laughed softly, too quickly. Inside, dread twisted her stomach. That night, lying beside Adrian, she replayed every word Thomas had said. She wanted to dismiss it, to believe her husband's reassurances. Yet the shadows around Adrian seemed darker now, the cracks in their perfect marriage wider, and for the first time she wondered, was her loyalty to Adrian blinding her from a dangerous truth? The ballroom glittered with gold light, chandeliers catching the sparkle of champagne flutes as the city's elite gathered for another Blackwell Foundation gala. Adrian stood at the center of it all, tall, magnetic, the kind of man who seemed born for stages like this. He raised his glass, delivering a speech that drew laughter, admiration, and applause. His words flowed like silk, about charity, opportunity, and giving back to the community. The audience saw a philanthropist. Victoria saw a performance. She sat beside him, the dutiful wife in a sleek navy gown, her smile perfectly practiced. To everyone else, she looked radiant, proud of her husband's generosity. But her eyes told a different story, glassy, uncertain, betraying the unease she carried since her encounter with Thomas. Adrian placed a hand over hers on the table, his grip firm, controlling. "Smile," he whispered under the applause. And so she did, her lips curving into the flawless mask she had worn for years. Later that night, as guests mingled, Adrian made his rounds. He charmed politicians, flattered CEOs, embraced clergy members. To each person he offered something, a donation, a promise, a connection. His name was synonymous with trust, a shield so polished that no one dared to question what lay beneath. "Your husband is remarkable," one councilwoman told Victoria, her voice warm with admiration. "He's doing so much good for this city." Victoria nodded. "Yes, remarkable." Her throat tightened around the word, inside unease gnawed at her. She thought of the ledger. She thought of Thomas's warning, and as she watched Adrian shake hands with the district attorney, she wondered, how many of these people, blinded by his wealth and charm, would stand by him if the truth emerged? Or worse, how many were already entangled in his carefully woven web? When the gala ended, Adrian basked in the glow of success, his arm around her waist as photographers snapped their departure. In the limousine, silence pressed between them. "You were quiet tonight," he said, not looking at her. "I didn't feel well," she replied softly. Adrian chuckled, though there was no warmth in it. "You never were a good liar, Victoria." His hand brushed her cheek, tender on the surface, but his eyes were sharp. "Don't forget, appearances are everything." She turned her face toward the window, watching the city blur past. Her reflection in the glass was ghostly, a woman trapped between truth and loyalty. The lie had grown heavier. It wasn't just Adrian carrying it anymore, it was her too. Every smile, every nod, every whispered toast was another stone on her chest. By the time they arrived home, she knew the facade had tightened its hold. In public, they were flawless. In private, she was drowning, and yet the performance would continue. Because stopping it meant exposing not just Adrian's secrets, but her own silence. The first sign of fracture came in whispers, a news article speculating about financial discrepancies in one of Adrian's charities. A quiet visit from two suited men who introduced themselves as consultants, but asked questions too sharp to be casual. Victoria noticed the subtle shifts, Adrian's late-night phone calls, his sudden silences, the way his confident smile lingered a second too long, like a mask slipping. At home, the change was unmistakable. He paced their study with restless energy. Phone pressed to his ear, voice low but heated. When Victoria entered, he snapped his gaze up, eyes flashing with suspicion. "Were you listening?" "No," she whispered, clutching the doorframe. His laugh was bitter. "You think I don't see it? The way you watch me, waiting for me to falter." She swallowed her fear, forcing calm into her tone. "I'm worried about you, Adrian. That's all." But worry was an insult to him. In Adrian's world, worry meant doubt, and doubt meant betrayal. He closed the space between them in two strides, gripping her shoulders with too much force. "You'll stand by me, no matter what. Do you understand?" She nodded, though her heart screamed. The mask that charmed senators and CEOs had no place in their home now. Behind closed doors, Adrian's volatility erupted in sharp bursts, slammed doors, venom-laced words, moments of cold silence followed by suffocating affection. One night, as thunder rattled the windows, Victoria found him tearing through his files, scattering papers across the floor. His hands shook as he shoved documents into the fireplace, the flames hungrily devouring evidence. "They think they're clever," he muttered, eyes wild. "But I'm smarter. Smarter than all of them." Victoria watched the firelight dance across his face. For the first time, she saw not just her husband, but a man cornered, dangerous, unraveling. Later, as they lay in bed, the storm outside mirrored the storm within. He traced her cheek with his fingertips, soft, almost tender. "You'll keep my secrets, won't you, Victoria?" His voice was low, almost a plea. She forced a smile. Of course, but inside the truth crystallized. She wasn't simply his wife anymore. She was his accomplice, tethered to every lie, every crime, every mask he wore. And in that tether lay her prison. When the storm broke the next morning, the city gleamed with sunlight, but their home was heavy with smoke and silence. Adrian dressed immaculately, fixing his tie in the mirror, his reflection flawless once again. To the world, he was still the perfect man. But Victoria knew better now. The cracks in his mask were spreading, and soon someone else would see them too. Victoria could no longer pretend ignorance. The coded ledgers, the shredded documents, the sleepless nights filled with Adrian's frenzied pacing, all of it formed a picture too sharp to blur. The man who once dazzled rooms now frightened her in the silence of their home. One evening, after yet another dinner where Adrian barely touched his food, she finally spoke. "I know what you're hiding," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. His fork clattered against the plate. Slowly, he raised his eyes to hers. For a moment, she saw the mask falter, the flicker of panic. Then came the smile, smooth as glass. "And what exactly do you think you know, my love?" Victoria's heart raced. The money, the lies. Those men who came asking questions weren't consultants. They were agents. "I'm not blind, Adrian." He leaned back in his chair, studying her as though she were a chess piece he hadn't accounted for. Then, with sudden violence, he slammed his palm against the table, making her jump. "Careful," he hissed. "Careful what you say in this house." She flinched but did not back down. "You're dragging me into this whether I want it or not. I deserve the truth." For a long stretch of silence, only the ticking of the dining room clock filled the air. Finally, Adrian rose from his chair and walked to her side. He crouched, taking her trembling hands into his own. His voice softened, his eyes glistening with something that looked like sincerity. "You think I've built all this just for myself? No, Victoria. It's for us. For the life we deserve. Wealth, power, security. I've given you everything." He cupped her chin. "But if you betray me, if you even think of leaving, everything burns. You, me, the Empire, they'll take it all. And you'll be left with nothing." The shift in his tone was chilling, part promise, part threat. Victoria's breath caught. She realized then that she was bound to him, not by love, but by fear. Fear of ruin, fear of exposure, fear of the man she once thought she knew. That night, Adrian drew her into his embrace, whispering reassurances. "We're in this together." "Say it." She hesitated, but the grip of his arms tightened. Her voice cracked as she obeyed. "Together." From then on, their marriage transformed into something darker. They played their roles in public flawlessly, the admired businessman and his devoted wife. But at home, their bond was cemented by silence, lies, and threats too sharp to ignore. Victoria felt herself drowning in contradictions. She despised the way he controlled her, yet part of her clung to the illusion of stability. If she exposed him, she would be destroyed alongside him. If she stayed silent, she became his accomplice. In quiet moments, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, searching for the woman she once was, the hopeful bride, the loyal wife. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who smiled at galas while her heart trembled in shadows. The FBI's presence lingered in the background, subtle but suffocating. She noticed unmarked cars parked too long near their street, a man in a gray suit watching her at the grocery store. The faint click on their phone line. Every sign reminded her. The walls were closing in, yet when she turned to Adrian, he tightened his grip, his confidence unshaken. "They'll never catch me, because they'll never catch us." His words chilled her to the bone. It was no longer his scheme alone. By staying, by lying, by surviving, she was complicit. And so, the pact was sealed, not with love, not even with loyalty, but with the shared knowledge that if one of them fell, they both would. As Victoria lay awake that night, Adrian sleeping soundly beside her, she whispered to herself in the darkness, "I'm trapped, but deep down." Another thought stirred, a dangerous, rebellious whisper she dared not voice. "Or maybe I'll find a way out." The net tightened quietly at first. A paper trail here, a whispered name there. Then, with the precision of hunters closing in on their prey, the FBI moved. What had once been suspicions hardened into evidence. Shell companies tied to Adrian's name. Charitable donations funneled through offshore accounts. Even whispers of connections to men who dealt in blood as easily as numbers. At the center of the storm was Thomas. He remembered Victoria from the innocence of college years, laughter in crowded hallways, notes exchanged before exams. But now his role was different. He was no longer the young man with wistful eyes. He was an agent bound by duty. And Adrian, the man she had married, was his target. Victoria received the summons on a gray morning. A plain envelope, unmarked but heavy in her trembling hands. Inside, a request. A voluntary interview with federal agents. Her breath hitched. Voluntary. The word was a lie. Refusal was never truly an option. She sat in the sterile interview room, fluorescent lights humming above. 2 agents entered, Thomas among them. His eyes met hers, soft with something like regret. The other man was harder, expression carved from stone. "Mrs. Blackwood," the agent began, "we appreciate your cooperation. We know this isn't easy." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "I don't know what you expect me to say." Thomas leaned forward, his voice gentler. "We're not asking you to condemn him. Just help us understand." But every question felt like a blade. "Did you know about the offshore accounts? Were you aware of his connections? Did you ever see signs of violence?" Her lips formed denials, half-truths, fragments of lies wrapped in carefully measured pauses. To speak against Adrian was to betray him, and to betray herself, because hadn't she already become part of his schemes? But to shield him meant burying the truth deeper, suffocating under the weight of secrets. At one point, her composure cracked. "You don't understand," she whispered, eyes glistening. "If I talk, I lose everything." Thomas's gaze held hers. "Victoria, if you don't talk, you might lose yourself." The words clung to her long after she left the building. On the drive home, the world seemed sharper, edges jagged. Every shadow in her rearview mirror looked like a tale. Every silence in the house felt heavy with listening ears. When Adrian returned that evening, he wrapped his arms around her, too tightly, as if sensing her wavering. His smile was polished, his charm intact, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed suspicion. "They asked you questions, didn't they?" he murmured against her ear. "I trust you answered wisely." Victoria forced a smile, heart pounding in her chest. "Of course. I'm with you." He kissed her forehead, satisfied. But as he moved away, she realized the truth. The FBI's net wasn't just closing around Adrian. It was closing around her too, and she was running out of time to decide. Would she remain his shield or become his undoing? Adrian found the message by accident, or perhaps by design. Victoria had been careful, deleting Thomas's number, hiding every trace of their brief exchanges. But paranoia sharpens instincts, and Adrian's had grown razor sharp. The faint imprint of a call on the bill, the flicker of her eyes when she silenced her phone, tiny cracks that told him everything. The confrontation came without warning. "Who is Thomas?" His voice was low, but beneath it churned a storm. Victoria froze at the kitchen counter, the knife in her hand trembling as she chopped vegetables. She tried to steady her voice. "An old acquaintance." He reached out, "An old acquaintance." Adrian slammed his hand on the counter, the sound like a gunshot. "Don't insult me. He's FBI, isn't he? He's been filling your head with poison." Her heart thudded painfully. "I didn't tell him anything." "I swear," but swearing was useless. Adrian's rage had already chosen its target. He grabbed the knife from her hands and hurled it into the sink, the clatter echoing through the room. "You betrayed me," he hissed, face inches from hers. "After everything I've given you, this life, this home, you dare side with them?" Tears welled, but she forced steel into her voice. "I sided with survival. Do you even hear yourself anymore? You've turned our marriage into a cage." The words cut deeper than any blade. Adrian's mask slipped entirely, revealing the fury beneath. He swept the dishes from the table, glass shattering across the floor. Victoria flinched but did not back down. Years of fear and silence were unraveling, spilling into the open. "You think you can live without me?" His voice thundered. "Without me, you are nothing." She stood shaking, but for the first time she met his gaze without bowing her head. Without you, at least I'd still be myself. For a moment, silence stretched, broken only by their ragged breathing. Then Adrian laughed, a hollow, terrifying sound. You've been listening to Thomas. He wants to destroy us. And you've helped him. The laughter dissolved into icy calm. He turned away, pacing. Very well. If you want war, Victoria, war is what you'll have. That night the house became a battlefield. Screams reverberated through the walls, followed by the crash of broken glass and the dull thud of fists on wood as doors slammed. Then came silence, colder than the violence itself, an icy gulf neither could cross. In the morning, neighbors looked away from the shattered window and bruised silences. To the outside world, Adrian and Victoria were still the gilded couple. But inside, their marriage had collapsed into something irreparable, an unholy war with no rules and no winners. Victoria lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, realizing the truth. Her husband was no longer just dangerous. He was her enemy, and in that war, survival would demand betrayal of her own. The storm outside matched the chaos within. Rain hammered against the windows, rattling the house as if nature itself demanded entry. Victoria sat alone in the darkened living room, her nerves coiled tight. Adrian hadn't spoken to her all day, his silence more dangerous than his shouting. When the front door slammed, she jumped. He entered soaked from the storm, his eyes gleaming with something feral. The smell of whiskey clung to him, heavy and sharp. You think you can betray me and walk free? He muttered, throwing his coat onto the floor. I never betrayed you, Victoria whispered, her voice trembling. I just wanted the truth. The truth? He laughed bitterly, stepping closer, each stride predatory. The truth is, without me, you'd be nothing but another desperate woman forgotten by the world. I made you. His words cut, but his tone cut deeper. She backed against the wall as his hand gripped her wrist. Pain shot through her arm. Adrian, stop! But he didn't. His fury had broken its leash. He shoved her against the wall, his face inches from hers. If I go down, you're coming with me. You're mine, Victoria, mine. Tears burned her eyes, fear clawing at her chest. She tried to twist away, but his grip tightened. The storm outside roared louder, lightning flashing across his contorted face. In a desperate surge, she pushed him back, stumbling toward the kitchen. The knife block glimmered beneath the flickering lights. Adrian followed, steps heavy, voice venomous. You think you'll run to Thomas, to the FBI. They'll eat you alive. You're already complicit. She grabbed the nearest knife, holding it out with shaking hands. Stay back, Adrian, please. For a moment, he froze, then smirked. You don't have it in you. He lunged. The world collapsed into chaos, a scream, a struggle, the metallic tang of blood filling the air. When silence returned, Adrian lay sprawled on the floor, crimson spreading across his shirt. His lifeless eyes stared into nothing. Victoria dropped the knife, her body trembling uncontrollably. She staggered back, pressing her hands to her mouth. It had happened so fast, too fast to untangle. Self-defense, panic, or something darker lurking beneath years of repression and fear. She collapsed beside him, the storm's echo swallowing her sobs. For years she had been his prisoner, bound by fear and deception. Now he was gone, but freedom didn't feel like freedom. It felt like blood on her hands. The thunder rolled like a judge's gavel, sealing her fate. She knew the FBI would arrive soon. Thomas's warnings had made that inevitable. What story would she tell? Would they believe her truth? Or see her as the final architect of Adrian's downfall? Victoria closed her eyes, whispering into the storm. What have I done? The shadows gave no answer. Only the sound of sirens in the distance growing louder, racing toward the house that now reeked of death. The sirens arrived before dawn, red and blue lights flashing against the rain-slicked windows. Neighbors gathered in hushed clusters, whispering about the tragedy behind closed curtains. Inside, Victoria sat handcuffed at the dining table, her silk nightgown spattered with blood, her face pale as bone. Detective Alvarez leaned across the table, his voice steady but sharp. Victoria, tell us what happened tonight. Her throat tightened. She glanced at the mirror on the wall, knowing agents watched from behind it. Her reflection looked foreign. Hollow eyes, trembling lips, a woman she barely recognized. He attacked me, she said finally, her voice thin. I had no choice. Alvarez didn't blink. And the knife? How many times did you stab him? I don't remember. She swallowed hard, her hands twisting in her lap. It all happened so fast, the door opened. Thomas entered, no longer the warm college acquaintance, but an agent of the bureau, his badge catching the fluorescent light. He sat across from her, his presence heavier than the storm outside. "Victoria," he began softly, "we've been investigating Adrian for years. Fraud, laundering, extortion, even connections to contract killings. You knew something, didn't you?" Her breath caught. The walls seemed to close in. To admit she knew would make her complicit. To deny it would brand her a liar. "I was his wife," she whispered. "I stood by him." "Isn't that what marriage means?" Thomas's gaze hardened. "Marriage doesn't excuse crime." Or silence. The words hit her like a blow. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand. He controlled everything, my money, my life, even my thoughts. He made me believe I couldn't survive without him." Detective Alvarez folded his arms. "And yet somehow you did. Convenient, isn't it?" The accusation sliced through her. She shook her head violently. "No, I didn't plan this. I just wanted it to stop." Silence followed, the kind that suffocated. Behind the glass, the FBI scribbled notes, weighing every syllable, every tremor in her voice. Thomas leaned forward, his tone softer now. "Victoria, if you keep lying, you'll go down with him. But if you tell us everything, if you help us dismantle what's left of his empire, we can help you." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Every word felt like stepping onto a tighter rope, the noose cinching around her neck. She closed her eyes, remembering Adrian's cold laugh, his hand clamped on her wrist, his promises of ruin. When she opened them, the decision had already been made. "I'll tell you," she whispered. "But you won't like what you hear." The agents exchanged quick, silent glances. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing her inside with the weight of confession. Outside, the storm had passed. But inside that sterile room, the real tempest was only beginning. The courthouse loomed gray against the morning sky, its stone walls cold and unforgiving. Victoria stepped out of the transport van in handcuffs, flanked by deputies. The whispers began instantly. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, neighbors craning to see the woman who had once embodied grace and charm. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. On one side, rows of journalists scribbled furiously. On the other, victims of Adrian's schemes sat stiff-backed, their eyes burning with anger. Victoria kept her gaze low, every step echoing like a confession. The prosecutor rose first, his voice sharp as a blade. "This is not merely the story of Adrian Blackwood," he declared, "but of the wife who stood silently by, who smiled while others suffered, who helped keep his empire alive through silence and complicity." Victoria flinched at each word. She wanted to scream that she had been trapped, manipulated, broken. But the truth was a double-edged sword. Every defense she clung to also revealed how much she had ignored. When her attorney stood, the tone shifted. "Victoria Blackwood was a prisoner in her own home," he said firmly. "Controlled by a man whose charm masked his cruelty. She endured psychological warfare, gaslighting, and violence. Survival, not complicity, explains her silence." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The judge's gavel restored order, but the tension lingered. The most crushing moment came when Thomas took the stand. He spoke not as a friend, but as an agent of the FBI. He outlined the years of investigation, the shell companies, the laundering, the threats to witnesses. Then his voice caught slightly when he looked at Victoria. "She had chances," he said quietly. "She could have spoken, but she chose not to until it was too late." Her heart twisted. That quiet disappointment hurt more than any accusation. When it was Victoria's turn, the room fell silent. She rose, hands trembling, and met the judge's eyes. "I loved him," she said softly, "and I feared him. I told myself I was protecting our marriage, our image, maybe even myself. But in doing so, I failed to protect anyone. That is my guilt, and I will carry it." The gavel struck. The verdict was announced. Adrian's empire dismantled, his name forever tied to fraud and blood. Victoria spared prison through a plea deal, but sentenced to years of probation, restitution, and a life in the shadows. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters swarmed, but no one looked at her with admiration anymore, only with scorn or pity. As she walked out, the weight of survival pressed heavier than chains. Her reputation was ruined, her marriage destroyed, her life hollowed. She had escaped prison, but not the sentence of memory, and in the quiet echo of her steps she wondered if freedom was only another kind of prison.